Today, I'm welcoming Lucy Highland, who's dialing in from Waterford in Ireland. So I have to say, I'm looking forward to having this conversation and hearing this wonderful, beautiful accent for the next hour. Lucy is the owner and founder of the Self Care Revolution. So no doubt you'll be able to guess what we're going to be talking about today, but it might not be exactly what you think. Lucy's been working in the wellness industry for over 2 decades and has qualifications in applied art and psychology, art therapy, and nutritional therapy. And as a guide, she brings these modalities together in her work, as well as interweaving embodied wisdom, eco arts, and human design into her offerings. Lucy, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation and, listening to your accent for the next hour.
Good, good to be here, Nadine. I'm excited to be here. This should be fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. It's kind of a topic that I don't know a whole bunch about. Well, self-care, yes, and we'll get into that a bit, but well, not a bit, a lot. But yeah, we have quite different. It's interesting. I was listening to another recording of a podcast that you did, and we have definitely got some things in common, but quite diverse as well. So that's really interesting. And one of the things that I love about, connecting the dots. But let's start by you telling us a little bit about what you do and maybe like how you got to doing what you're doing in your
hmm
work.
I sounded great when you were listing off all those things. I was like, she sounds really cool. Yeah. I'm always surprised at I think the journeys we all take. Like we're not on this, certainly hasn't been my experience that we're on this kind of linear path where we kind of had this goal and we ended up working towards that and achieving it. That certainly hasn't been my perspective. And I have those people in my life and, they're great. But it's not something that I've been able to really relate to in my own process. And there's a whole load of reasons for that. But sometimes I feel like I'm a breadcrumb follower. It's like something will show up and it will be of interest and it will be of curiosity and intrigue, and I'll just follow it. And I never know particularly why I've started it. And so even if I go back to my early education, it was always people. It was people and place. And I learned that through geography and psychology. That was my blend when I was first started studying. And then I took this kind of dark road into the world of kind of planning and social planning and ended up living in Australia for many years, working in the western suburbs of Sydney, which were, a high immigrant, a lot of socioeconomic problems. And it really got me thinking about how do we maintain a sense of wellness and well-being in our own lives, given the places that we live, given the factors that influence us, given the particular paths we all choose, and how we end up in places that we never really thought we'd end up in here, and how do we react and respond to places. So I worked a lot with the health department when I was working in Sydney, and it got me really interested in the idea of health. And at the same time, I had an illness in my own life and ended up having to come back to Ireland and actually recovering from that illness. And while I was doing it, I got really, again, the breadcrumbs were there about, okay, what's going on in terms of health and the individual. And I kind of took it away from the society aspect where I'd spent so much time focusing, and I actually went into more of the individual. This idea, well, if we start on the inside and we kind of work out, how's that for a model, rather than I was working kind of governmentally around policy and planning and trying to set up systems where people could live in some sort of a balanced, kind of harmonious way with their environments. And I ended up about 10, 15 years in the nutritional therapy world. And I loved that. And I would have been very holistic in my perspective. So, even though I recognized that nutrition was a cornerstone of good health, and I still do, I recognized that there were so many other factors at play. And as I saw people and we worked on their nutrition or their lifestyle, I just kind of felt like there was something missing in it all. And I didn't really understand what that was, but I was curious enough to start kind of digging into it. And at that same time, just through kind of sheer coincidence, I ended up back exploring my own creative world. And I started with reading The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, which is a fantastic guide for anyone who's looking to reconnect with that creative side. And creativity, you know, I have a very broad term for that. I don't see that as holding a pen or a paintbrush. This to me is how we get to be creative in our lives. And so I ended up going back into formal education and studying applied art and then art therapy to really start getting the nuances around material, connection to the material, use of the material, and how when we come together in community around particular tasks, such as making or building or creating, really interesting things begin to happen. So I then have kind of, I couldn't let go of the world of health because it was, and well-being, because it was such a fundamental part of my existence. But I also recognized that there was a merging and a melding and a kind of a bringing together of those worlds. And at a similar time, I also discovered human design, which I know is a love of the two of us. And it is the system, I guess, that really gives you a perspective on your energy and how to use your energy and how best to navigate the life that you lead through making really good decisions, through knowing yourself really well, through developing self-awareness and self-knowledge. And so all of these things started kind of happening concurrently, and then they all came together in this toolbox, which is a fabulous toolbox where I can draw on the knowledge and understanding of human design. I can connect in individually with people's creative spirits, with their creative intuition, but then I can also bring them together in groups and allow them to recognize that they're not these isolated individuals with this set of problems that they need to solve. That actually, when they come together in community, they can see that they're part of something, they're part of the system, they're part of a community, and it kind of gives them a perspective. And one of the things that I really noticed as I was doing this work was we exist in a world of active, progressive achievement, manifestation. I mean, we live in a very active world. And I really recognized when I watched people, whether they be in human design and they were simply going through a process of looking at themselves, becoming more self-aware, whether it be in the creative process where they had to surrender and let go and actually submit to the material and enter into a dialogue with material. What I noticed is that creativity allows us to move into a more receptive realm. It's like a panacea is a big word, but it gives us something to counteract this focus on growth, achievement, expansion. And it kind of allows us to sit back, reflect, rest, recuperate, restore, rebalance. And I think you see more and more how there's an industry that is always been there to assist people to simply shift into another gear, another way of being, whereby you can open yourself up more to, I don't like using the word magic, but it's very hard for artists to describe what they do or what they witness when they see people in the creative process, but certainly opens them up in a different realm within themselves. And that realm is often neglected in this world that we're all existing in.
Yes. Wow.
I know I
No,
tend
I
to.
was like,
Oh,
I was like, okay, I've got lots of questions coming up here, but I'm just going to stay present. They'll come back if they'll come back if if it's meant to be. But I would love to continue with this thread about creativity because you've mentioned, like, it's obviously a massive part of what you do, and you mentioned that it doesn't have to be artistic necessarily. I don't know if they were the exact words that you were using, but yeah, but also that there is some, like, you're kind of, from what you described, it seems like you're bringing something from within.
mhm.
It's a form of expression.
Oh, that,
And yeah, so I wonder, like, if you could kind of give us some examples of how do you, when someone comes to you, like, I'll just get straight in with this because I'm really curious about this idea of creativity and what it means. When someone comes to you and they say, Lucy, I want to work with you in whatever format it is, and you want them to connect with their creativity, what
mhm.
how do you bring that out of them if it's not just art per
Mm,
se?
mm.
How do they know when they're being creative? Or how do you
It,
know?
it's I suppose I can only witness what I notice in people. And so what I witness when I am with people individually or in a group is that it's like I'd be quite a sensing person. Just I tend to pick up on cues kind of more from a sensation based, and there's something happen in the process where it's like there's a drop, and it's like we drop into another way of being, because you can imagine, let's just pretend it's the surface, so let's just, on the surface there are the waves and there's the movement, and people will come into a session, people will come in and they'll have this, like, this motorized vehicle that's just running. And when you provide a space for them that is grounded, very tactile, very sensory, then something happens where they drop. And they can feel it, you can feel it. Can I describe it or pick a moment? Probably not. But there's something that happens when we drop. And Csikszentmihalyi wrote an awful lot about this concept of flow.
Mm,
And in that moment when we drop, what happens is we enter into something called a state of flow. And in that state, what people tend to report is that time doesn't seem to exist. They're conscious, they're thinking, but the activity that they're doing is such that it takes enough of their focus and concentration, but doesn't overwhelm their thinking. And yet they engage in the physical act of doing it. So it is quite physical to me. So it
mm,
could be, gardening, it could be singing, it could be doodling, it could be rearranging your furniture. and putting cushions in different places. So this is what I notice, and this is what I see. And it's like the world is suspended for that period of time. And for artists, it can be something that they can engage in hours, forgetting to, almost forgetting to eat, like not noticing the world around them, just completely engaged in the flow of their own creative process. Or it is something that we can dip into, whether we're, just waiting for a bus and, decide to, just draw on the sand at the bus stop or something, your feet. It's not necessarily this, it doesn't have to be staged in a particular way. And that's what I notice. And to me, in that, there's a surrendering, because you do have an element of being in control, but actually you're in a much more relational place. You're in a much more relational, where you're actually relating and interacting to what's around you in a very different way, in a very different way. So that is, I have a friend, a great friend here in Waterford. When I arrived here, I've only just moved here. I've been through kind of quite a process in the last year or two, and I met her, and she's decided to write a book on the theory of creativity, because when she was doing the research on like what creativity is and how do we define it and how do we describe it to people, and how then do we therefore teach people the basics of creativity, she couldn't find a consistent theory. She couldn't find consistent language. And so she has gone and developed her own model of creativity. So it's always been a very difficult, intangible thing. And yet it is something that people recognize and can articulate and recognize when they're in it and when they come out of it.
Yeah. I think it's interesting what you said about the like gardening, that being one of the examples, or changing your furniture around. And it's that feeling of like time. I know that we moved house 12 months ago, and I was painting, and I'd never painted before, and I was painting a shed, and it was just like I didn't think about anything else. Just paint. Just, what I know, it was like that's kind of, and I, the same thing happens to me when I'm gardening. I'm not thinking about all of the other things in my life that I've got to do. I'm just in that moment doing what I need to do in that moment. So I think that that's, kind of where I recognize that feeling for myself. And that makes sense. Like gardening, so many people love gardening, right? And that's probably why. But it's kind of like a form of meditation, isn't it?
Exactly. And so even in like I remember in lockdown, I was kind of struggling with my own creativity a bit. So traditionally what I do is I weave. So I create hand-built weaves, and I would frame, and they would be like more like a wall hanging than a practical, useful object. They're way more decorative. And in lockdown, I was struggling with that creativity because of everything that was going on, and the difficulties that we were all facing. And so I actually started doodling, and it's a drawing. So you use, mark making tools, a pencil, a pen, a marker, or whatever the case may be. And you doodle, and you're not drawing. I don't start out the session today, we're going to draw a cat. I literally just follow a very kind of more embodied sense of movement. And it's about, when I look at it, it doesn't necessarily have to achieve a result necessarily, but it is an engagement in the present moment in a particular way. So I can sit still, I can close my eyes, I can do those things. I can do them for short periods of time. But if I'm doing something, Then I can meditate, quote unquote, whatever that term means. I can meditate for long periods of time, for more sustained periods of time. And it gives me access to, not better or worse, something different than what you get in a more formal meditation. That suits me. I mean, I also dance as a form of meditation. So I'm always pushing boundaries for myself so that I can find tools that I can work with in order to find that space. Because at the end of the day, what I recognize more than anything else is there needs to be periods of my day where I'm still. And it's in that stillness that I can get a perspective that I can't get when I'm busy, and for my own sense of well-being, my own sense attempting to keep my sanity in today's world, I need that antidote. I need the opposite of that. And it's interesting because it's finding a balance that's correct for you. Because I know if I'm too stationary, if I'm still for too long, I can do a little kind of self-imploding. So it's that movement of the body whereby it desires to be still and silent, quiet, and then it wants to go back out to the world and interact, and then it wants to retreat again. That's what I've worked up for myself in terms of my own process.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's interesting because I love to go, like I take my dog for a walk on my own every morning. And I'm not one for listening to anything. I'm like, I'm going to listen to nature. But I kind of the physical movement gets my thoughts processing, but like in that kind of flow where they like I'm like gone. And I'm like, oh, I've walked this far already. You know? So it's a fine line between like needing the physicality to get there, because I also need to I need to stop it within that walk and get that feeling of
Yes.
like
Yeah.
taking it all in. And as soon as I start moving again, the mind and the thoughts,
Yeah.
but they're kind of like they're those thoughts, you know, where you don't really think about anything kind of thoughts, like that kind of semi meditation. Yeah, it's interesting how that physicality can make a difference to it, and the stillness can make a difference to it. I've been thinking, I wonder, well, and you probably like this is probably a thing. Like I've spoken to a couple of other guests about creativity, and like we actually are, as humans, creative, right? We create our reality. So when we see creativity like that, yeah, we're creating all the time, right? But I wonder, but it's almost like we've tried to pigeonhole it into the arts, isn't it? Yeah. What was I going to say? Oh, and I wonder whether you could speak to like creativity being that kind of more feminine. Would you say it's more of the feminine aspect, like intuitive flow, whereas the male can be a bit more kind of like these are that kind of, well, we live more in
Yeah.
a sort of society of that masculine.
It is interesting because I think creativity is a massive term, and I think the creative process can go in many directions. So, say for example, I'll give you an example. Weaving is my craft.
Yes.
Okay. On the one hand, we can have a large scale loom, which you may have seen on TV or in various productions. Large loom that's mechanized, and where they're working to a very specific pattern, so they know exactly what they're doing, and they want to achieve exactly that result. And they've designed it, and they've planned it, and then they implement it through the creative process. Okay, so that's a form, and you're going to end up with a carpet or a wall tapestry that may end up being very functional at the end of the day. So that's when creativity bears an outcome. Okay, and if you look at creativity in the workplace, companies are seeing creativity now as the most important asset amongst their staff, because creativity leads to such innovation. Okay, so that's one form. Now, the other form is, say, for example, my approach to creativity. So in my weaving, I don't have any plan. I work intuitively with the material. So I will have a frame, like a circular frame generally, and I need a container. So I need a frame that holds the weight of the pattern. I need to set a really good warp, which is like the foundation of the piece. I need to ensure that's in place. But after that, I can go anywhere. My pieces evolve. They can move into very different realms. So my intention might be around healing, around connect, about exploration, about navigation. They might be intentions, but actually I move very much with the material. So then my process can be described as very feminine. I'm working with the unknown all the time. I don't have a set end result necessarily. And so it's really, I'm wondering, as I'm speaking to you, the intention actually is really important. So, I mean, I do work in the organizations, communities, and I'll go in and they'll talk about wanting to introduce creative tools into the workplace, and we are going to do a weekend project over 4 weeks, and the management right, so what's the end result going to be? What's the product going to be? How's that going to look? Can you name exactly what the outcomes and going to be? And I'm like, I don't know. Let's see what happens when we put a group of people together. Let's see what happens when they don't get told what to do, but they work from their own intuition. I really like blue. God, I'm really attracted to blue today. I was driving to work, and the sunrise was gorgeous and the sky was gorgeous, and that's the blue I want to use. So you're just in a very different engagement and dialogue with life. So that's where things get really interesting, because we shift out of a very predictable, automated, outcome-driven focus into something that's fluid, and that scares the living daylights out of people, because we seek more than anything to have a sense of control over our lives. We seek predictability. We have a predictable brain that is working nonstop to create a predictable day that will unfold in a certain way. And people get so much, but we're not all necessarily here to be comfortable. Life isn't predictable. So in the creative process, we can explore within a relatively contained space how we can react to and how we can work with the utter and complete unknown. And what happens is we begin to see spaces actually arrive that open up within us and outside of us, where there's the potential for something completely new. Because if you've packed your day full of the predictable, what you think you want, what you're expecting to get, there's very little space there for a surprise,
Mm.
an inspiration, an unpreviously thought notion. And that's where creativity, it's like it serves it up on a plate to us, and it allows us to explore and expand in a very different way.
Yeah. Wow.
And when you witness that within somebody, I mean, it's such an honor to witness that within somebody, because they think they're this, they think life is this.
Yeah.
And even within themselves, they're like, you know, and the creative process it just opens a few doorways, and you can feel the expansion. And people would be, I've never thought about myself like that before. I've never seen that myself within myself before. Oh, I didn't know that existed. Oh, I thought that was gone. Oh, there's something. And that's a very different way of approaching life than the way most of us are, the way most of us.
Mm. Yeah. I'm kind of curious at this point to hear, because obviously we both are part of a human design community. You've been working with human design for quite some years. I'm pretty fresh. But you use human design in your work. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing that potentially it's not something you do as much in groups, like it's probably easier to do it individually, or
Oh,
is
yeah.
it?
I'm very much working on an individual basis, but I've done a couple of groups now. And
Yeah.
again, it's we're part of a community.
Mm,
You see how one person brings something up, and it connects a whole lot of
yeah.
dots and
Yeah.
around. So I'd love to move towards that,
I'm
maybe in
just
the future.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like that kind of, the way that you're explaining when describing when someone who doesn't necessarily think that they're creative, or that like, and they live in this kind of box of this is who I am, and that can be from conditioning, right? As we what we know in human design as conditioning, like all of the layers that other people have put on us. And part of human design for us grown-ups is like actually being able to go, "Ooh, that's not me."
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder how you connect those two things, and how they, like, how that works with someone when they're because that conditioning is kind of like what you explained as being in that, you know,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
knowing
yeah.
that, not or kind of recognizing those things in yourself when you start to open up your creativity. but
Mm-hmm.
but it's almost like a remembering, and then the
Mm-hmm.
chart could confirm that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I think, I'm a fifth line, so I'm quite heretical. And so my my approach to human design is different. I've never gone the road of, the traditional education in human design. It isn't something that I necessarily connected with in terms of doing, readings, or looking at it from that approach of telling people what their chart was all about.
Yeah.
Where I tend to engage is, like, get people creative about their chart.
Mm.
And so simple acts of drawing, connecting into the particular flow of energy, playing with this very set, it's a mechanism. It's a very kind of scientifically rigorous mechanism. That's how I find human design. And a bit like the frame in a loom, that's really important. But where it gets interesting is where you begin to play and explore and get curious about that. And I think, we can become very fixed on what we think human design is about and who we think we are, just as much inside and outside the human design community. And I tend to push and nudge at those notions because I see the potential that there's more to you than. And if we get stuck in a particular story, whether it be a human design story or a story from our parents or a story from whatever, I can't remember. Even this morning, I woke up and I was getting ready and I started a story in my head. Can't remember what it is now. And I remember saying to myself, well, that's just the story of what happened. There's nothing in what happened before that necessarily needs to happen in this particular situation, unless you just want to replicate that situation again and perhaps learn more from a different angle. But actually, the beauty of human design is it tells us where we can go to, the places we can go to within ourselves that are reliable, so that in times of stress or overwhelm, or when we're having to make really difficult choices or decisions, then there's a place inside of us which is consistent and reliable that we can go to. Outside of that, there's 1,061 variations of a gate.
Wow.
Of one gate. And so it's very difficult for me to think that if we share the same gate in human design, if we share the same line in human design, that we're going to have in any way the same experience. Because, and again, creativity takes that, this is who I am, to, okay, well, why can't we play and explore that through a visual realm, through an engaged material? Yes. Again, beginning to open up doors and see beyond the limitation of how we see things. It's interesting, this limitation is, and with Pluto and 60 for so long, which is the gate of limitation in human design, we're there to see the limitations, but in the seeing of them, we get to transcend them. We get to push beyond them once we begin to acknowledge and see them. It starts getting interesting when we begin to look beyond. And in a situation where on a global scale, we don't seem to have a whole lot of solutions right now, when we engage in the creative act, we begin to see beyond the way we're seeing right now. And that's where it gets interesting.
Yeah. It opens up like possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ability and potentials.
All right. Your business, your offering is called, well, your business is called the Self-Care Revolution. So we've got to talk about self-care. As I said, I was doing a little bit of research before our call, and I listened to another podcast that you've been on, and you were talking about your past work, I think, in nutrition, and like what how your perception of self-care kind of changed based on stuff that was going on within the health and wellness space. Can you talk a little bit to us about that? And what I guess it's like what our perception of self-care is, or what we're told self-care is, and in fact what you're suggesting self-care is, something a little bit different.
I suppose what I really wanted to do, and I wanted to do this personally, and so I wanted to do this with others, is begin to challenge and question a very overused, over commercialized word. And I guess when I started out and I was working in nutrition, I was working with individual clients, or I was working with companies and organizations around this. I just felt harshness, I suppose, in it. And that harshness didn't sit comfortably with me. Because there was an assumption that there was a problem, that you had to fix it, that it was an individual problem, and that it was another thing that you were doing wrong.
Right.
And that I witnessed people who came into me who were nutrition.
Sorry that you dropped out a little bit there. Can you say those words again?
Yeah. I met people who were using these, these overall positive traits like health, nutrition, and well-being, but they were using it almost as a stick rather than the carrot. It was real. I've got to motivate myself. I've got to do this right. And there wasn't the love there. There wasn't the passion for themselves. And I thought, well, if we're not loving ourselves and being compassionate with ourselves whilst we change, or whilst we motivate ourselves, or whilst we go and orchestrate, particular changes in our lives, then I really struggled to the point of it. And I didn't understand at the time that I was going to find human design, which is embedded in this whole notion of self-love. And I was going to find creativity, which is really a portal and an opening into self-awareness, but in a way that is self-acceptance, seeing and recognizing all those parts of yourself. And so I kind of, started switching this idea of self-care from this thing that we did. Like, I've got to put the self-care on the calendar, and people do that. They have their purple, and that's their time to do this. And I get that. But when it's not embedded in an actual love and compassion for yourself, it can get very difficult, very easy, because it's just another thing. And I didn't want it to be another thing. I wanted it to be something that radiated from within, that self-love, and that allowed you to move out into the world in a particular way, that there was a drawing, a pulling out of expression, rather than what I was feeling, which was very much push. And so it's a curiosity. It's, in human design terms, it's an experiment. It's not a 5 steps to anything. It's an incorporation of a way of being that allows the softness and the gentleness to then guide the activity, which is a very different, like the creative process. It's turning it on its head. It's moving away from this action orientated into a lot more of a more kind of receptive kind of sensing way. So there are days that you might have a very different experience of how you look after yourself one day to the next, depending on how your day is going, And I notice people in the busyness of their day just put on the kettle, just make a cup of tea, and just sit for 5 minutes nursing that warmth of a cup of tea and looking out in the garden before you go to whatever next.
Yeah, I love that. It definitely coming from the health and fitness industry, you see that kind of, that the shoulds and people
Mm,
coming because they have to, or like smashing
mm,
themselves when they exercise because they feel bad about themselves, and
mm.
just the different energy that creates around the whole thing.
Yeah,
um
it's true, isn't it? It's
yeah,
really
yeah,
tricky. It's sticky.
mm,
And you probably see it too, obviously from a different perspective in terms of um, a more physical perspective. I was having this conversation with a friend the other day, and she's a 3 on the Enneagram. She's manifesting generator. She has a lot of energy. She's very achievement focused. And I see, and I was very curious with her, and I asked her to just wonder about what is this going to get her, this thing that she wants to achieve, the body,
mm,
the career, whatever it is. What is that going to give her, and to put that into some sort of a sense? And then I was like, well, imagine if you had that right now. So we do these things so that we can find a pathway to loving ourselves.
mm,
If I'm safe, I'm going to feel better about myself. I'm going to look a little bit better, and I'm just going to have a bit more confidence when I walk down the street. And so we know what we're looking for. And how about you embody and incorporate those aspects into yourself first? It doesn't stop you from going out and achieving those things, but there's this twist, this
yeah,
slight turn then
yes, yeah,
of
yeah.
impact.
It's doing it because it's doing it to take care of yourself because you care about yourself,
Mhm,
compared
mhm,
to doing it because you think
mm,
and that you'll like yourself better when.
mhm.
Yeah,
Yes, very, very different approach.
yeah, yeah, and quite subtle, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. I mean, I notice now in a day, I can feel it when I begin to push, when I might start, oh, I can't, I really need to get to that next thing. And I can feel there's a tension, there's a drive, there's kind of like this motoring, this kind of willing myself forward. And it takes a moment in those situations to actually, even when people walk into a room with me, I get them to sit back in a chair. I get them to feel the seat under their sit bones. I get their backs to relax into the back of the seat. Really simple things that switch us out of this active kind of ready to pounce any moment now zone into okay, where's there where's there space within me? And I dance a lot. And so a lot of dance is finding more space within me to actually hold not just that thriving, successful, moving forward, progressive individual that's part of who I am, but that she can sit alongside this more restful, more receptive, more intuitive being, that they can actually have a relationship with each other that doesn't have to be one bashing the other over the head.
yeah.
They form an internal relationship with each other. And when we get those internal relationships, and that's where the tools come in, like the creativity, the human design tools to build those internal relationships, we then start having a different experience with our external relationships.
I think one of the things that you said about that kind of like catching having to catch yourself, like for
Mm,
me, those moments can be almost like when you get caught up in that busyness, or needing to do more, that can actually be a form of escapism as well, from like sitting with yourself and any discomfort you might be having. Like And it's not necessarily wrong, but when you can begin to witness that
Yeah.
behavior,
Hmm.
it's like reaching for the phone or, doing things for the sake of doing them, sort of thing, which I definitely
Yeah. And I
catch
think
myself doing.
one of the things I like about the approach of human design is there's no moral judgment in human design. There's no right or wrong. There's no correct definition. There's never a sense of judgment about the complexity of what it is to be a human being. So as human beings, we have such an array of parts of ourselves. And I can even feel it in my kind of that G center feeling, even as I'm talking, that sense of continually finding ways of making peace with all those aspects of ourselves so that they can coexist. Because that striving, focused, achievement driven individual has such an important part in our lives. But she doesn't have to be fighting all of the other parts.
Mm,
She can coexist, she can relate, she can seek advice from that other part of us that may be more considered, maybe more wise, maybe more experienced. But I find that when we're continuously achieving and doing, we're not allowing those spaces of reflection. I mean, you talked about your walk at the
mm,
start. That walk where you're actually digesting your life, whether you're consciously focusing on it or whether thoughts are just moving through one after the other after another. You're giving yourself that space to kind of realign yourself and actually allow that digestion, and then that digestion gets permeated into other aspects of your way of being in this world.
mm, yeah. We're getting close to the end of our
We're
call.
just
We're
Nadine.
just getting started. Part two coming up. um, I'd just love to hear a little bit more, well, and obviously for our listeners as well, about your offerings, your work. You've talked about working with people in person, but also you work online.
Mhm.
How does that all, who would come to you? Who is it? Someone who feels lost? Is it someone who just wants to tap into their creativity? They need more time for rest and repair. Like what?
Mhm.
So I've asked you about 10 questions in
Mhm.
in a row
So
there, but
my work is split, as you
mm,
say. So here in Ireland, I work very much on the ground.
mm,
I work community, I work with groups. That tends to be like 80% or 90% of my in-person work. Um, and that creates its own, I get a lot out of that personally, but also I love working with that group dynamic. So that's my in-person work. And that is mostly creativity based. And that tends to be fueling a lot then of what's happening on my
okay,
online stuff.
yeah,
So for my online stuff at the moment, I am doing like one-to-one sessions where we focus particularly either on human design or on the creative aspects. So as you say, for a lot of the time, it's people, they're at that maybe transition zone
mm,
and they be stuck in a particular way. They may be stuck in a particular way of thinking or a particular position, and they need that little bit of movement. And I will guide them through the creative process to see where there may be room or space in terms of change, or not even change, in terms of shifting their perspective about the way things are, and then allowing a lot more creativity and space for creativity within their life so that they begin to continuously shift their perspective kind of about where they are. I also run some online courses. I do some mindful doodling, meditation doodling workshops. They come up. For me in Ireland, that tends to be a real wintry evening fire kind of an activity. And that's where we can come together in group and we can begin to co-regulate as a group. And we go through a series of meditation and creative meditative exercises that I've developed. So that you can see that kind of separation in terms of the work. I still really enjoy working with human design, working with creativity, working with the tools that I have in order to allow people to shift and begin to see new potentials and new possibilities in their way. Sometimes at a particular phase in their career, they may be a particular phase of their own creative journey. So a lot of people are just saying, okay, how do I create space for creativity in my life? Simple act. Where do I resonate to? Where do I see the potential in what I'm doing? And opening up doorways for them in terms of that.
Great. Sounds amazing. Yeah, quite a few avenues of yeah. And I guess the world is evolving and changing at what seems to be quite a rapid pace at the moment. And so just finding those places, like with someone like you who's a guide who can hold and support and I guess help someone to find a safe space, security within themselves through these times.
Yeah, and I think I see these two aspects running parallel, and so just to be clear, yes, I agree. From an individual perspective, I think us settling within ourselves, finding spaces within ourselves, finding spaces to rest, to recuperate, to get into our own creative flow, very important. So that as we navigate the challenges that we're in, that we found a place in ourselves that we can find home. We can come back to, that we have, irrespective of how turbulent the day is, we can come back to ourselves. We have our breath, we have our body, we have the capacity to ground ourselves within ourselves. So yes, I agree. But also, Nadine, and I can't separate this anymore from the work, the importance in finding a community. Now, that can look like anything else. And with the wonder of the online communities that exist, with the wonder of the communities that exist even within wherever we live, finding those places. I was at a dance workshop on Sunday, and there was this girl, it was her first time ever coming to dance. So I would practice with a practice called 5 Rhythms, open floor. It's a very movement, meditative process. So I was walking out with her at the end, and she said, "Oh my God, I can't believe there are places like this, that there are people that I can go, places that I can go, people that I can be with that are as weird as me." Oh, we can get weirder. That was a Sunday morning. Come on a Saturday, like Friday night, just finding places where you can express yourselves. And that could be a walking group, could be a choir. That could be your local, college, community college, where you find an art class. Doesn't matter. But this idea that we're sole individuals on this individual track, having to sort and solve and create the whole world, is exhausting. So find people and find places where you can go, where you can be yourself, that you can express yourself. Because when you're in a community of people who also love the same things you do, for example, dance, you can begin to open up, loosen, accept, build confidence. All of those things you're trying to do as an isolated individual, when you get to do it in a group, it's just so much more powerful.
Amazing.
So yeah, here's hoping I can, I don't know, interesting to see if I move to more community-based work in 2025, but I'm not sure about that yet. We'll see what emerges.
Sounds good. Thank you, Lucy, so much for joining us today. It's been a beautiful conversation. I really appreciate your time. Beginning of the day coming up for you. Hey?
Yeah, thank you, Nadine, and thank you for this podcast. I think I was saying before we started the recording, you know, I'm checking into your podcast and the people that the conversations you're having, and it's great. So you're the one who's creating pieces. So
there you go. I'm a creator. Yay!
Here's your part of the creative act.
Yeah.
You know, these conversational spaces.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Take care.
No worries.
It's been great to have you.